Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the origin story of Carl Gustav Jung. And here's the absolute kicker about Jung's pioneering theories. He didn't cook them up in some sterile clinical laboratory. No, he built them straight out of his own, frankly, incredibly bizarre and deeply personal childhood experiences. It's wild stuff. But before we get into the actual events of his youth, we've got to establish a core foundational idea. Jung strongly believed that you can only truly comprehend a person by looking at their inner myths, not just the stuff that happens to them on the outside. Science, right, with all its averages and data points, well, it's often just too general to capture the actual subjective reality of a single human life. So to really understand Jung, we have to look at the myths that shaped his inward vision. And how do we actually know about these inner myths? Well, we're pulling these incredible stories directly from the pages of his very own autobiographical reflections. The book is called Memories, Dreams, Reflections, recorded and edited by his associate Aniela Jaffe late in Jung's life. Let me tell you, it is such a rare, unfiltered look straight into the mind of a literal genius. Section 1. Life as a Rhizome and the Hidden Depths. So this central metaphor pretty much guided Jung's entire life and work. If you're not familiar, a rhizome is an underground root system. Jung believed that the visible part of life, the stuff above ground, is totally fleeting and temporary, sort of like a summer blossom that just fades away. But the true enduring essence of who we are, that grows invisibly, way underground, hidden inside that rhizome. And this just brilliantly illustrates how he categorized his own memories. He looked at outer events, things like the people he met or the trips he took, as just fading, accidental occurrences. Honestly, they completely paled in comparison to his inner experiences. His encounters with the unconscious, on the other hand, were indelible. They were, in his own words, the fiery magma of dreams and visions. That's the stuff his entire life's work crystallized out of. Section 2. The Underground Dream, an Initiation into Darkness. Okay, this is wild. This is a genuinely terrifying dream he had super early on, like between the ages of 3 and 4, and it basically acted as his initiation into this dark inner realm. So in the dream, he finds this dark stone-lined hole right in the middle of a meadow. He walks down these stairs and hits a heavy green brocade curtain, which kind of symbolizes the Earth's vegetation. He pushes it aside and boom, there's a red carpet leading up to a majestic golden throne. But sitting on this fairy tale throne is this towering, faceless, tree trunk-like figure made entirely of flesh and skin. And it has a single eye right on top, just gazing motionlessly upward. As you can imagine, he's completely paralyzed with terror. But then the suspense dials up even further. He hears his mother's voice calling out from way up above him, and she just declares, "Yes, just look at him. That is the man-eater." Jung woke up absolutely drenched in sweat, scared to death of this single-eyed subterranean entity. So the absolutely crucial point here is what this thing actually represented. It took Jung literally decades of deep study to realize that what he dreamt of was an ancient ritual phallus, an ithyphallic symbol. It was essentially a subterranean god, and it stood in this stark, dark contrast to the comforting daylight teachings about Lord Jesus he was being taught at the time. Naturally, this dream haunted him for years. It firmly established this massive, complex duality in his mind between the light world of his daytime religion and the dark, inescapable reality of his own unconscious. Section 3. The Secret Mannequin, Finding Inner Security. To cope with that terrifying inner world we just talked about, plus a pretty stressful home life with his parents, 10-year-old Jung created a deeply secret coping mechanism. Without even knowing it, he essentially performed an ancient ritual. He took a wooden ruler and carved this tiny 2-inch mannequin out of it. He gave it a little coat and tucked it away in a pencil case. Then he added a smooth stone from the Rhine River that he had specially painted, which kind of gave the figure its own soul. After all that, he hid the whole pencil case way up on a beam in the forbidden, worm-eaten attic of his house. And from time to time, he'd sneak up there and add these tiny paper scrolls written in a totally secret language, basically building a private library for his little figure. The impact of this little ritual, it honestly cannot be overstated. This was an inviolable secret for him. He actually felt like the safety of his very life depended on it staying completely hidden. Whenever his parents would argue, or he just felt super insecure, he would think about his safely hidden mannequin up in the attic. Setting up the secret gave him this profound, almost magical sense of security and power. It literally became the formative factor of his entire boyhood. Section 4. Confronting the neuroses. The clash with reality. But, as you might guess, this intense, isolated retreat into his own inner world eventually triggered a pretty severe crisis when he turned 12. He got this minor head injury after being pushed by a classmate, and suddenly, Jung started getting these intense fainting spells. And they'd happen every single time he tried to do his homework or go to school. So for 6 whole months, he just stayed home, goofing off and retreating into nature. But then, he overheard his terrified father talking to a friend. His dad asked, what will become of the boy if he cannot earn his own living? And wow, hearing that sheer despair in his father's voice, it completely snapped Jung right out of his daydream. He immediately realized, okay, I have to get to work. So he marches into his father's study and cracks open his Latin grammar book. About 10 minutes in, bam, the first fainting fit strikes. He almost falls right off his chair, but he fights it. He literally tells himself, devil take it, I'm not going to faint. 15 minutes pass, and a second fit hits him. But he just kept studying. An hour later, a third attack comes on. And again, he just pushes right through it. By absolutely refusing to give up, he completely defeated his own neurosis right then and there. He went back to school and never had another attack. Actually, scratch that. It was more than just going back to school. He birthed this incredible, intense conscientiousness that stuck with him for the rest of his life. Section 5. The two personalities. The duality of man. This brings us right to the culmination of his childhood development. This is where his sense of self just completely splits into two distinct beings. So one day, he recklessly takes this boat out on a lake and gets a massive scolding from the owner. And right then, Jung felt this huge internal clash. He realized his mind actually held two completely different people. Personality number 1 was just this vulnerable 12-year-old modern schoolboy who, was terrible at math and probably deserved to get yelled at. But personality number 2, that was a powerful, historic authority figure, an 18th-century-old man who commanded total respect and literally wore buckled shoes. And the second personality wasn't just some passing daydream. It was so overwhelmingly strong and literal that Jung would actually experience this intense physical nostalgia for the 18th century. He instinctively identified with antique carriages and old statues. It got so real that he would frequently and mistakenly write the date 1786 on his school papers instead of 1886. I mean, how wild is that? But thankfully, out of this profound duality, a unified consciousness finally emerged. Emerging from this dense, lifelong fog where things had merely happened to him, Jung finally synthesized all these bizarre, powerful experiences. He discovered his own true authority. He famously wrote about this moment saying, "Now I happened to myself." He had found his own will, his own existence. And that realization completely anchored the man who would eventually go on to map the human psyche for the rest of the world. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about everything we've just covered. The underground dreams, the secret rituals, the dual personalities. Now take a second and consider your own psychological origin story. What invisible forces or secret childhood memories might be shaping your life right now, just beneath the surface? How much of your adult worldview is anchored way down there in that hidden rhizome? It's pretty wild to think about, right? Anyway, thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the mind. And remember, keep exploring those hidden depths.